All right, everyone, we're back. Episode 6 of Underscope Podcast. Today, I am joined by Dr. Alexis Nagengast. What's going on, Dr. Nagengast? How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Keeping up. We were talking briefly beforehand, but I don't know. It's crazy to think it's already like first week in November, and then 1 month from now, we're already done the semester. So even in a virtual format, it's always flying, I guess.
It is, yeah.
So, for those who don't know, Dr. Nagengast is a biochemistry professor here at Widener University. She got her Ph.D. in genetics. Where'd you get your Ph.D. from again?
At Case in Cleveland, Case Western Reserve University.
So she got her Ph.D. from Case University in genetics, not biochemistry. We'll go into that a little bit deeper in a bit. But I want to start with your background because I was reading through your background a little bit, and you have been all over the place. So let's start there. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into like biochemistry in the first place, and then like how that evolved into you becoming a professor?
Sure, that's a good way to start. So I was a chemistry major as an undergrad because in high school, I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. And when I went to my guidance counselor, he said, "You're too good in math and science to teach kindergarten. Why don't you be a pediatrician? So go to college, go to med school afterwards." So I went to college pre-med as a chemistry major because I was not crazy about biology, but I really enjoyed chemistry. And once I got into college and started taking labs, I loved it. So I went to Duquesne as an undergrad, and chemistry majors had 2 labs a week. And we didn't have lab with everybody else. We had our own labs. And I just loved it. I loved being in lab, and I realized I preferred being in lab to being with people, and that it would be better off, I think, if I went chemistry route as opposed to medicine. So I dropped the pre-med, and I think that's very common. A lot of people change their mind in college. And so after that, I took PChem my junior year, and that killed me. Like I was like, I hate chemistry. Like, what am I doing in this? Because it was so different than organic. I loved organic. I enjoyed PChem lab. Definitely. I liked all my labs, but the course was really challenging for me. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to teach high school at that point. So when I graduated from college, I went into a teaching program at the University of Delaware. And I started in the summer and realized that wasn't going to be for me. So 2 days before the semester started, I went to the chemistry department and I asked them if I could get into their graduate program. And they said, sure. So I actually started grad school at the University of Delaware in biochemistry. I had never taken a biochem course, actually, as an undergrad. And I took biochemistry there and I really enjoyed it. But that's not how you pick a grad program, right? Like you don't pick it by default. So it wasn't the best thing. I ended up, my husband at the time got a job offer in Chicago. So I left Delaware, moved out to Chicago, and I got a job in a fruit fly lab. Wow. And I loved it. Loved working with fruit flies. And that's how I decided to go back to grad school. Because I worked on flies, it was a genetics department, but my research was actually on RNA splicing. And RNA is a hybrid of both genetics and biochemistry. It's a nucleic acid, so it's like genetics, but it has structure and it folds, so it's like a protein in some ways. So it's biochemical, and that was the right fit for me.
First of all, I think it's super funny you went to undergrad as a chem major and then wanted to go teach kindergarten. I don't think you to go do that, but okay. So real quick, so just so the viewers are kind of aware, so what exactly is biochemistry, and then what exactly is genetics, and then what's kind of the difference?
So I think of biochemistry as the chemistry behind biological life. So metabolism, nucleic acids, how they're synthesized, the chemical reactions that make up life. Genetics is more the inheritance. So genes, how they're inherited, the phenotypes associated with those genes. So it tends to be more focused on genetic material whereas biochemistry is lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, fats. It's proteins as well. Proteins do all the work. So it's a little broader. Certainly genetics incorporates that as well, but I think of it as more inheritance, whereas biochemistry is more chemical reactions.
Got it. Okay. And then, so I know your research interest you're kind of in the RNA splicing. So you kind of want to take us through a little bit exactly what you did specifically, and then where you are like right now.
Right. So RNA is the intermediate between DNA and protein. When a gene gets turned on, RNA is produced, and that RNA is translated to make protein. But before that RNA is ready to be translated, it has to be processed, and that's through splicing. So what I work on are the proteins that bind to the RNA to help define intron and exon borders in the very, very beginning steps. Because if you don't have those defined precisely, you'll get different products ultimately when the RNA is translated into protein. And it is a level of gene regulation. Splicing is a level of gene regulation that occurs at the RNA. And so that's what I work on. When I was in graduate school, I worked on sex determination in a fruit fly. So splicing of a gene called sex lethal, that if it's spliced one way, the fly is female. If it's spliced another way, the fly is male. It's binary, it's one or the other. And if you make the male product in a female, the female is dead. If you make the female product in a male, the male is dead. That's why it's sex lethal. Now I work on the splicing of genes that are related to lipid metabolism, the storage of fat. And it's a lot more nebulous, right? So with sex lethal, you're female or you're male. You splice this way or you splice that way. With lipid related genes, you may splice a gene 75% of the time this way and 25% of the time that way, simultaneously at the same time. So it's not binary like it was before. And depending on how a gene is spliced, you store more fat or store less fat. And so that's the phenotype that I look at. I look at the fat in flies. I knock down different splicing factors. So I decrease their expression. That changes the splicing of genes. I don't necessarily know what those genes are, but I have a few candidates. And then I measure their fat. I measure their triglyceride. One thing biochemists do is they like to grind things up. So I grind up the flies and I measure their fat, whereas a geneticists kind of like to look at things intact, right? They like to keep their organism alive. I always say I like my organisms cold and dead, and I just grind them up and work with them that way. I'm not so into the live stuff.
Oh man, I think that's awesome research. So what do you think like the misconceptions are about biochemistry? Like, why do you think, because like I have no interest in biology. Like I don't really care. In high school I didn't really care. I didn't have to take biology in college. When biochemistry is part of my course ladder, I was a little nervous. I was like, oh man, like here we go. So actually, and right now I like it, but it's the basic biochem course. But I would say like, what do you think like the misconceptions are about it?
I think people think that it's hard, and I don't know so much that it's hard. And I was with you. I also did not enjoy biology. That was not a class that I liked, because I liked doing problems. I liked solving problems, and biology is a little more descriptive. So I think people think that maybe biochemistry is hard or metabolism is really difficult. I have gone to many doctor's appointments myself and with my parents. And when, my mom says, oh, this is my daughter, she has a Ph.D. and she's a biochemist, I can't tell you how many doctors say, oh, biochemistry, that was my worst class. And they say, I don't remember anything. I had the Krebs cycle memorized and I don't remember it. I've never had to use it. And I think that's one of the misconceptions about biochemistry, is that it's just memorization of metabolic pathways. And that's what it seems like people remember when they took the class. At Widener, we do it very differently. Obviously, it's problem-based. And I think, at least I try to emphasize in biochem when I teach the second semester, the connection of the pathways and the purpose of the pathways, as opposed to the memorization of everything in a pathway. So a lot of people think biochemistry is just the memorization of metabolic pathways.
No, I agree with that. I can actually second that because that's, in Dr. Clem's class, it's hardly any memorization, I would say. I would argue. It's a lot of like critically thinking about, you know, the beginning steps of biochemistry. We talk about, collagen and alpha helices and beta sheets and like why do they form and like how does that stuff actually apply in, you know, biochemistry. So,
And you'll remember that. You'll remember that way more than you'll remember the Krebs cycle.
And I was still, I was also relieved too. We didn't have to memorize all the 20 amino acids. I was like, oh God, we have to memorize all these. But it's not that. Like you can look up the amino acids, but what you need to know is how do these amino acids behave in different pH, different temperature. That's more important, I would argue.
Yes. And that's chemistry, right? That's just the application of chemistry. It's the same as general chemistry. It's just now in the context of an amino acid.
Yeah. So, yeah, I agree. I think biochemistry is heavily underrated, and hopefully we could change. Well, at least here at Widener, but I would say across the board, I would say hopefully we can get to a point where it's less memorization, way less memorization, and people can actually start learning about the processes behind what they're learning. I don't even know what the Krebs cycle is. I don't even know.
Well, that's second semester. It's the citric acid cycle, actually. And the reality is you don't need to memorize those pathways. Everybody's got a phone, right? Like you can look on your phone if you need to look something up. Why a pathway does what it does, how it interacts with other pathways, that's important. That's more important than the individual memorization of the reactions.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Nagengast. When was the point that you decided that, because I know you've been in academia pretty much your entire career. Like, when did you know you were like, I want to go be a professor? Like, was there a moment where you're like, you know what, let me go be the professor?
So I always enjoyed teaching. I did a lot of tutoring when I was in college. I had a really good high school chemistry preparation. And so people would just come and ask me questions like before exams. So we didn't have official tutors like we do at Widener, but I did a lot of tutoring and I always enjoyed teaching. So I think I kind of knew in grad school that that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be like at a research place where I spent my day writing grants and not really working in the lab. I truly enjoy working with my flies and working in the lab. And as a professor at Widener, I do some teaching and I do some research. And I think it's the best of both worlds that I get to do both the research myself, as opposed to being in charge of like a lab full of people who are doing the research. So I think in grad school, well, I kind of always wanted to be a teacher, right? Like I always did want to be a teacher, but in grad school, I realized that I wanted to be a professor.
I think everyone deep down inside like wants to be a teacher because I think a lot of people have like the knowledge and it's just like a matter of like manifesting it to other students. I was like, people you're teaching.
Especially if you've done tutoring. So if you've been a tutor, because tutoring is not for everybody, right? Not everybody enjoys it, but if you do, you tend to really enjoy tutoring. And so that tells you that maybe being a professor is something you would like to do.
What is like the most gratifying thing? Like what was, okay, two questions. One is what's the most gratifying thing about being a professor? And then like what's like has been like your favorite Widener moment, like, or moments?
That's a good question. So I think my most favorite thing is when a student gets it. Like when, you're explaining something and they struggle and they don't understand. And then it's like the light bulb goes off and it all comes together and they, they understand the material. And that happens like all the time. It's very rewarding. And I think my Widener moment, like one of the best things that's happened at Widener. That's hard to say. There's been a lot.
Maybe you can pull out a couple if you'd like. It doesn't have to be like one.
So I think one of the best was years ago. I took some students to the fly meeting, and they were presenting a poster at the
Fly
Fly meeting. So the Fly meeting is every March or April. There's about 1,500 researchers from around the world who work on Drosophila, and they come together. It's like the ACS meeting, but it's just for flies. Like, it's fly people. And it's this year it's virtual, actually, so that'll be interesting. But I had a student. She had been doing undergrad research with me. She started her sophomore year on splicing, and she presented her poster to somebody in the splicing field, like a fly person in the splicing field. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, "Your student's really good. Like, your student knows her stuff just as well as my grad students do."
Wow.
So he was really impressed with, what she had done and what she knew. And I think that was like a highlight, right? That we could compete on the professional level, actually, at the Fly meeting. So that was really enjoyable.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was good.
What's some advice you give like some students, like whether they're in biochemistry, whether they're in Gen Chem, maybe they're prospective students?
I say be open to possibilities. So you may have a plan. You may think, all right, I want to go to med school. I want to do this. I want to have this done by this certain age. And things happen. Pandemics pop up, right? Like, things throw your plans off. But if an opportunity presents itself, take advantage of it. Because it doesn't hurt to try, right? Try something new, try to grow in different ways, expand what you thought you wanted to do. And a lot of times you'll realize it's a good experience. Also, don't be afraid to walk away from things that don't work. Like, if something really is not working, it's okay. Like, if you're in a job you hate, it's okay to look for another job and leave. You should do what you enjoy.
Did you no call, no show?
Do what?
No call, no show?
Yes.
Oh man, that's I did that before, actually, in high school. I had no call, no show because I was like a busser at a restaurant, and it was during the senior grad parties, and I told them, like, I need off these days. Like, I'm not gonna miss graduation parties in senior high school. They didn't give me off, and I said, screw it. I'm the no call, no show. I'm not going.
And in the end, do you regret it?
No, I don't regret it one bit.
No, right? Yeah, right. So sometimes it's worth it to walk away if you're not getting something out of it. It's okay to do. Maybe tell them, maybe give them some advance notice or whatever, but don't stick around doing something you don't like.
I think it's just no. In all seriousness, I think it is important to figure out what you don't like to do as much as what you do, like what you want to do. Because like we mentioned, like, if you're stuck doing something you don't like doing, well, you're kind of screwed.
Right. So, and life's too short. Life's too short to be doing stuff you don't like. Yeah.
I want to circle back to something, though, Dr. Nagengast, because it says, I know you grew up in Germany, right? Now, how long? So, if you want to tell the viewers, like, when were you in Germany? Because I know your dad moved around a lot. He was in the military. So, like, when were you in Germany?
So my dad was in the Army, and we were in Germany kindergarten to second grade, and we moved every year that we were in Germany. So I went to a different school for kindergarten, first and second grade. And then in high school, I was in Germany for about halfway through ninth grade to halfway through 11th grade.
Wow.
So half years.
Where'd you live? Frankfurt?
So I lived in Stuttgart when I was in high school, and Kaiserslautern and Mainz and Katzweiler when I was in elementary school.
I'm going to ask you, can you speak fluent German?
I cannot anymore. So when I was in high school, I could speak enough to get around, right? I could, shop, order food, find the bathroom, the things that you need to do. I understood a lot more than I could speak. And in Germany, they speak English very well. So I didn't always have to. It's been a while. Yeah. I think it would take me some time to pick it back up again.
I took German in high school, and it's actually pretty fairly easy language. It's really not that difficult.
It's not. And so when I was in grad school at Delaware, I actually had to read somebody's Ph.D. thesis that was written in German because that was kind of the basis of what my project was.
Wow.
And that was okay, Right.
I'm sure reading German science jargon is not easy, but
the figures made it easier, right? I could understand the figures. Picture is worth 1,000 words. That helps.
that's funny. Oh man. So how was like high school in Germany? Like, because they don't call it high school, right? It's like secondary school. I forget what they call it. But
Right.
how does it compare?
Like, so I actually went to an American high school. So I went to a Department of Defense dependent school. So it was all Americans, and the base that I went to high school on was the European headquarters of the U.S. military. So there were kids from Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, like they were all, and some diplomat kids as well. But about a third of my school turned over every year. So about a third of the school moved every year because we were all military brats moving around. So that's
offensive. Is like military brat offensive? Like I was gonna say that, but I was like, wait, I don't know if that's offensive.
I'm an Army brat. Like I'm just an Army kid, right? We're just the little brats that were hanging around the base all the time.
Oh, okay. See, okay, gotcha.
But I'm okay being an Army brat.
Are you proud?
What I've always been, yeah.
A proud Army brat. That's cool. And then also, real quick, it says you also told me that you had a summer internship at AT&T.
Yes.
What was that about? Was there like some sort of epiphany that you wanted to switch?
Yes, actually. So my parents lived in Reading, and there was a plant in Reading. AT&T, it later became Lucent. Originally I think it was part of Bell Labs or something, and it was a manufacturing plant. And what they made many things there, but one of the things that they made were the chips that were used for semiconductors. And so my job that summer was to make indium phosphide chips. And so they were like in a plastic container about the size of a can of soda. And, I just prepared it, and it was heated, and I think at high temperature, high pressure, and just trying to figure out the ideal formulation to get those chips, because they were cut in a way that they could put the semiconductors in, but they had to be cut at an angle. So there was a lot of waste. So they're trying to see if there was a way that they could be crystallized and then cut to maximize the most use of the product.
Whoa.
And it was very different. It was, I was a chemistry major. So there was nothing living or biological about it. I learned how to use Excel very well when I was there. So that was a really good skill. Yeah, but I realized I didn't really want to be doing the same thing every day. Right. I didn't want to make crystals every day. Like even though it was a lab job, I kind of liked variety. And so that's what made me think that, something different was in my cards.
Well, Dr. Nagengast, I know you have a meeting at 12, so we'll go ahead. We'll wrap up here. All right, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining in on the podcast. Dr. Nagengast, thank you again for joining in. I know I appreciate it when we put this out to other students. She is a Army brat first, biochemistry professor second, just so you guys know.
All right.
And but I don't know, Dr. Nagengast, if you want to say anything else.
No, I think that's good. Yeah, just hang in there, right?
There. No, for sure. All right, everyone. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Then you're left in the dust, unless I stuck by you. You're a sunflower. I think your love will be too much, or you'll be left in the